Hey everyone, Wynn here, and welcome back to our virtual summer makerspace club. This week we're going to be reading The Pied Piper. It's originally a German story, and most will know it as one of the Grimm brothers stories. Grimm may be an appropriate one for this one. It's a little scary. If you would like to read along, pull out your yellow folder from your kit. If not, listen to me read it. And so let's begin The Pied Piper of Hamelin. Once upon a time, let me keep going. Once upon a time, there was a town called Hamelin. Hamelin was a prosperous town. It was a port town on the River Weser. Barges full of corn would come down the River Weser and unload at Hamelin, and there were silos full of corn in Hamelin. Barges full of wheat would come up the River Weser and unload at Hamelin. There were silos full of wheat in Hamelin. With the silos full of corn and wheat came mills for grinding the corn and wheat, bakeries for baking breads and cakes, shops for selling the breads and cakes, and of course people for eating. The people were so prosperous and busy loading and unloading, milling, baking, and eating that they didn't notice all the litter and rubbish that had accumulated in the streets. And of course with the rubbish came the rats. There were rats everywhere in Hamelin. Rats in the corn silos, rats in the wheat silos, rats in the bakeries, rats in the shops, rats in the streets, and rats in the houses. The rats bred and grew and grew and bred, and soon there were so many rats that life had become quite miserable for the citizens of Hamelin. They couldn't even bake a cake, take a bath, or sleep in their beds without a rat joining in too. The rats even nibbled on the ears of the babies sleeping in their cots. Something had to be done. The people of Hamelin made their way to the town square and knocked on the big brass doors of the town hall and demanded to know what the Lord Mayor was doing about the rats. The Lord Mayor appeared on the balcony in his black robes and gold chains and made a speech. Good citizens of Hamelin, you may rest assured that what needs to be done is being done. Don't worry about that. The good citizens of Hamelin weren't too sure about that, but they went home to their houses to see what would be done. But nothing was done. There was just as much rubbish in the streets and just as many rats in the mills, the bakeries, the shops, and the houses. In fact, there were even more rats. The rats kept growing and breeding and breeding and growing and eating and eating and eating. They ate everything they could get their teeth on. Nothing and no one was safe from the rats. The people were angry and marched to the town square and pounded on the big brass doors to know exactly what the Lord Mayor was going to do. When no Lord Mayor appeared on the balcony, the people started to chant, "No rats, no rats." Finally, the Lord Mayor appeared on the balcony in his black robes and gold chains and announced somewhat nervously that he had a definite plan of action. Good citizens of Hamelin, you will be pleased to know that I, the Lord Mayor, have given orders that a large hole in the ground be dug on the outskirts of Hamelin, and into that hole there will be swept all the rubbish in the streets and all the rats that can be found and killed. Soon Hamelin will be clean and clear of rats. Soon a large hole in the ground was full of stinking rubbish and the bodies of dead rats, and hurriedly covered over with dirt. But it was not enough, and there were too many rats and too many hiding places all over the town, and too much food for them in the silos and bakeries and shops and houses, and they grew and bred and bred and grew just as fast as before. And now with the rats came a plague of fleas, and with the fleas came a strange sickness. Some children and old people had already died. A plague was on Hamelin. As you can imagine, the people of Hamelin were even angrier. They marched once more into the town square. Each of them carried with them a dozen dead rats as proof of failure of the Lord Mayor's plan. They threw the rats in a pile in the middle of the square, and from and from a pole they hung an effigy that looked remarkably like the Lord Mayor in his black robes and gold chains, and they started to chant, "No rats or no mayor, no rats or no mayor." And when the Lord Mayor did come out of his balcony, he was surrounded by his counselors, and he announced rather nervously that the council had, in view of the rather desperate situation, agreed to offer a magnificent reward of 1,000 gold guilders to any person who could rid the town of the rats. The next day a stranger appeared in Hamlin. He was different than everyone else. His clothes were colorful and seemed to come from many different places. He wore a hat covered with feathers and shells and bones, and from a long scarf hung a silver pipe. The stranger followed the carts up from the port, and he saw the silos filled with corn and silos filled with wheat, and the mills and the bakeries and the shops and the houses and the people and the rubbish and the rats. He walked quietly to the town square and knocked on the big brass doors of the town hall. He told the mayor and his councils that for 1,000 gold guilders he could rid Hamlin of the rats that had infested it. The mayor enthusiastically agreed, and the Pied Piper stepped outside. He stood in the square and he looked quietly around. He took a deep breath and blew a note from his silver pipe that spoke to the rats of far-off places, of woods and forests and rocks and mountains. He blew another note that spoke to the rats of foxes and wolves and eagles and hawks. He blew a third note, and all the rats in Hamlin started to scurry toward the Pied Piper. They scurried out of doors, out of windows, out of drains, and out of holes. They scurried down the lanes in the streets toward the square. Now the Pied Piper started to play a dancing tune, and he danced out of the square, and the rats followed along behind. They moved out of the town and toward the port. At the riverside, the piper stopped, and he placed just one toe in the water, and as he continued to play, the rats continued to dance across the wharves and into the river. Rats by the thousands danced out of the town and across the wharves and splashed into the river, where they were drowned. When the last one had disappeared beneath the waters of the Weser, the Pied Piper stopped. He stood quietly and looked at the water for a moment, and then turned and walked back toward the town square. The good people of Hamlin were celebrating the victory against the rats, and at last they were free of the pestilence. The Lord Mayor and all the councillors were up on the balcony slapping each other on the back and making speeches. The Pied Piper waited for a quiet space and asked for his 1,000 gold guilders. The mayor called out so that everyone could hear, 1,000 gold guilders? How could you have possibly earned 1,000 guilders? Why, everyone saw how, while the rats were drowning themselves in the river, all you did was dance about and play that silly little pipe of yours. Here, be satisfied with 40 guilders and think yourself lucky at that. To the shame of the people of Hamlin, they agreed with their mayor and laughed at the Pied Piper as he walked quietly out of town. The next day was a religious feast, and all the adults were in the church, and as he walked back into the town, he stood quietly for a moment in the town square, and he took a breath and played a note that spoke to the children of faraway places, clean air and sparkling rivers. He blew another note that spoke to the children of fun and games and whales and dolphins and bright-colored parrots. He blew a third note, and all the children started to run and jump and skip out of the houses toward the town square. As they ran and jumped and skipped toward him, the Pied Piper started to dance out of the square toward the port. The adults in the church heard all the children go past, and they rushed out of the church to see what was happening. They called out to the children to stop and to come back, but it was like they could no longer hear their parents' voices. The parents were relieved when they saw the Pied Piper turn away from the river and dance with the children toward the mountain. Their relief turned to horror, though, when a small door appeared in the side of the mountain, and first the Pied Piper and then the children started to run and jump and skip inside. The parents ran up to stop them, but it was too late. All the children, bar one boy who was hopping along on crutches and couldn't keep up, disappeared inside the mountain, and the small door slammed shut so tightly that no one could tell exactly where it had been. The people raced up with the shovels and picks and started furiously digging holes in the mountainside, but it was to no avail. The small boy on crutches came to tell them of the sounds of faraway places, clean air and sparkling rivers, and fun and games and whales and dolphins and brightly colored parrots, but no one seemed to be able to hear. In time, the people got over their shock and their lives started to go on again. Barges full of corn came down the River Weser to unload at Hamlin. There were also silos full of corn once again in Hamlin. Barges full of wheat came up the River Weser and unloaded in Hamlin, and there were silos full of wheat once again in Hamlin. But they never forgot the Pied Piper, and they always paid their debts in full and on time. This week you're going to be making a pan flute. Get out your 10 straws from your kit or find some straws around the house. You're going to cut each straw to a different length. I suggest cutting the first one at 5 inches, the next one at 4 3/4 inches, and so on, each time decreasing the length by a 1/4 inch. After you've cut each straw, tape them together in order of length and keeping one side even, and then your flute is done. Now you can try playing a song. See if you can use your flute to write your own song. Just maybe don't do it around your older siblings or your parents. You don't want to annoy them too much. This week I also want you to try writing your own legend. Legends are usually told about a historic event, but it may not be 100% real, like the legends of King Arthur. There might have been a King Arthur, but did he really use a round table? We don't know. What event do you want to set your story around? Who will be your main character? Experiment with your flute and with your legend and tell us the results in the comments down below. Or create your own social media post using the hashtag MyFCPL so that way we can see it too. And I will see you next week with another story and more activities to do. Until then, keep on exploring and making, and I will see you next time.